You seem to still be up there somewhere.
Maybe I am. There are flying saucers.
Supposing they're Martians or something in there.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Weird Wednesday. I'm Asherz, and this is...
Tobias.
Tobias, I'm not going to ask you about your weekend this time.
Rude and mean.
I know. And you know what? I heard that you had a crazy, mind-blowing weekend. So
I did. It was amazing, and nobody is ever going to know.
They're not going to know about it. Sorry. It's just not going to happen. But that's okay. We have something more important going on. What's more important than Tobias's weekend? You
Almost
ask?
Nothing.
Almost nothing. But there is one matter. We have a special guest today. It's actually a very special episode. This is the first time we're kind of covering an investigation, an active investigation head on. This week, we are speaking with Lance Kestrel-Johnson. Lance, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm super excited that you agreed to do this. I don't know what's wrong with you to make you agree, but you know what? I'm not going to question it further. You're here.
He's obviously not a listener, and that is to our benefit.
I might have offered him $1 million. I hate to say it, but that was a lie. Sorry. So.
Darn.
So I got into contact with Lance recently because of a matter that I've been investigating. And it is something that you guys have kind of heard about because I've talked about it a couple times here. So I will just start from the beginning, where it all starts for me. So for me, back in June of 2024, I was giving a lecture about Indrid Cold at the Whitwell UFO Festival in Whitwell, Virginia. Okay, so I don't know what to tell you guys. If you don't know about Indrid Cold and you listen to the show, I've done like 4 episodes on it now. Go listen to those.
If they don't know who Indrid Cold is, they don't listen to this show.
Exactly. Like you're just, you lie. And that's okay. I guess there may be some people that don't listen to this show. So I'll give you a very, very brief breakdown. Indrid Cold is allegedly an alien who had a lifetime friendship with a human man, Woodrow Derenberger. So it's a lifelong contactee story, essentially. So at the end of my talk, I kind of do a bit in my lecture because, again, that's how I handle things is with comedy. And, I kind of touch on over and over again how I've never met Indrid, right? I've never met Indrid. It's like a funny joke that he's playing on me. And I've been trying to meet this man forever. And so I kind of interact with the audience. I'm like, maybe you're Indrid. I don't know. And then, of course, I ask people, I'm like, if you know anything about Indrid Cold, please come visit me and tell me, at the end of it. Well, at the end of it, 2 gentlemen come up and they weren't Indrid. I don't think. They might have been. But they wanted to bring my attention to something that they had found while they were in a town called Mount Airy, North Carolina. They go, hey, you ever heard of this? Is this related at all? There's these 2 headstones there. And, just look at them. And they pull out their phone. They show me a picture of these headstones, and they are interesting. On the headstones, they mentioned that the deceased had contacts and conversations with Outerspace Life from this year to this year. One of them spans the entire life. One of them is just a short amount of time. And I had never heard of this, but I figured no big deal, right? A quick Google search would solve this mystery. So I do. I go home and I look it up because I'm interested, especially because the dates on these headstones are so early on. So the contact, it says, starts in 1928. And that's, I'm a big sucker for really early contactee stuff. And so anyway, I go to Google it and I find, well, absolutely nothing. And that's what these guys were telling me about it, is that they couldn't find anything about this either. So it was a big mystery because normally when, we've seen weird headstones in other areas of the world before that have a big local lore behind it. Cemeteries have, all this big local lore, in your own state, you probably have a cemetery with a vampire grave and you have the weird ghost dog and, you got these little stories surrounding cemeteries. So the fact that there was nothing about this was just so strange to me. So I, took it upon myself. I asked you guys here on the podcast, do you have any information about this? Here's the name of the people. And I did my digging, I did my research and couldn't come up with anything. So fast forward to now January. I'm a terrible procrastinator, and I have been writing this Injured Cold book for a long time. And I've been kind of just rounding it off, right? Making sure I don't leave any loose ends. And this was kind of one of those loose ends because I never really fully looked into it. So I start thinking about these strange headstones again. And I get a hair up my ass and I go, you know what? I'm going to go add myself to some local Mount Airy Facebook groups. And I'm just going to ask the locals. I can't physically get there. I'm in Ohio, so it's a little bit of a ways away. So I utilize the Facebook groups. I get on there. I share the pictures of the headstones, and I go, "Hey, what's the deal with these?" And people are saying whatever. They're commenting, or they're just interested. Nobody's really giving me any information. They just know of the headstones, and they're like, I don't know. Let us know when you find out. So while those are kind of brewing, I am also calling locals there. I called the cemetery that they're at. I spoke with a gentleman there. He said, I know exactly what we're talking about. People ask about them all the time, but I don't know the story. I don't know what the story is behind it. So let me go ask around. I'll let you know. Great. I then called their local historical museum. I spoke with the curator. And, when I started to kind of explain what I was asking about, she stops me and she goes, "Is this about the aliens?" And I thought, good, thank God, this woman knows what I'm talking about.
Finally.
Finally, And she's like, "Yeah, I don't know anything. People ask about it all the time. People come from all over and they want to know about these headstones and they want to know the story. And I don't know anything." She said, "But let me look around." I'm like, "Okay, awesome." Dead end there. So I don't know if she just expected to get that call one day and she finally got it. I have no idea, but I still got to call her back. Anyway, while poking around some more, the gentleman, I know that it's a mother and a son. The son, Jack Overby, I'm looking up his name and come across an IMDb page for a short documentary, and it has to be about aliens. It's Outerspace Life. Oh, okay, aliens. This is it. Great. And I try everywhere to find this documentary online, and I cannot find it. So what do? I look and see who directed it. Surely this person's somewhere on the internet, and I see it's directed by a guy named Lance Johnson. And let me tell you, there's a lot of directors named Lance Johnson in the world. So that was already my first hurdle. But after I got through, a couple websites and kind of, dug through all the different people, I found our guest today, Lance Johnson from the documentary, from the guy that made the documentary.
Yay! You did it.
I did
I'm
it.
here.
And Lance, you are the guy. At this point, my Facebook posts on the Mount Airy local groups, they have blown the fuck up. People want to know this story. And it's all people that don't know the story. Not one person in any of these groups could answer what those headstones meant, what they were talking about. So you are like holding a master key right now. And I am so excited. We're going to unlock it here on the show. Without further ado, Lance, why don't you tell your story and how you got involved with this?
Yeah. First, I just want to say what a great setup. You're really good at storytelling.
Well, thank you.
I see why you have a podcast. But yeah, thanks for bringing me on to talk about this. I love talking about this. To be honest, I kind of feel like, or I felt like maybe this whole chapter of my life involving this story was kind of over. It's just been kind of radio silence ever since I put out the documentary. And I'm glad that this story is still carrying on and that people are interested, because that's exactly what Jack Overby, the man with the gravestone, would have wanted. He really wanted his story to be told. And I was lucky enough to be able to tell it. And kind of like how you found me is kind of how I found Jack to begin with. Like most people, like you described, who see the gravestones, I was introduced to the gravestones. I'm from North Carolina. In my ex-girlfriend, her parents had knew about this gravestone, and then they told her about it, and she told me about it because she knew I liked aliens. So she's like, check this out. So I go check out these gravestones, and I noticed that Jack's death date was not on the gravestone. So I was like, oh, he's still alive. So I grab a phone book for Mount Airy and find Jack Overby. I can't remember if there was more than one, but I know the first number I called, it was him. And he was so, excited that someone was calling him and was interested in not only hearing his story, but wanting to tell the story, because I had just graduated from film school, and I was kind of eager to kind of get a project under my belt, and was looking for something to, make. So I was like, oh, I'll make a documentary on this. But first I wanted to kind of, get to know him a little bit more, just to see if it's, worth, bringing some friends on a 4-hour drive. I was living in Wilmington, North Carolina at the time. Getting some small group of friends to drive to Mount Airy and film this, and had a short phone call with Jack. And then we end up deciding to go make this documentary. It was super, super low budget, just my friends and their cameras, some lights that my friend had bought off eBay, very minimal equipment, but.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Just try, I know it's been a while. Try to explain that phone call. You just called him and you're like, hey, I just happened to walk over your grave recently. You know what I'm like? What is that? How did that go?
Yeah. First, I just want to say I'm happy that I lived in a time where I was able to use a phone book.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And knew how to, I guess, and had that thought come into my mind. But yeah, I was kind of confident that I would be able to get in touch with him just based off his name seemed kind of unique. And when he answered, and I just asked, I was like, hey, are you Jack Overby? The man with the gravestone, which mentions Outerspace Life. And he was like, yeah, that's me, and like, he's a really sweet guy. And I told him my background and kind of what I was interested in. And we talked for about 30 minutes. He wouldn't really give me, on that initial phone call, he wasn't really giving me everything that I was like hoping he'd give me in terms of like background. But I think he did that intentionally because I think he wanted me to be kind of to actually come and film this thing.
You got to earn it.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, it worked. But I can't remember the details of that phone call. I just remember that he was very excited and thrilled that someone was calling him to discuss his gravestone, because he really wanted to tell this story, and he had tried to tell this story throughout his life, but no one would listen, or no one would want to listen. Sure.
And we see that, Tobias, how often with this stuff?
Oh, constantly. Something I was going to mention before the show, but I guess now is as good a time as any. Lance, if you're not familiar with any of the work that we've done, or any of the work that I've done personally, I've interviewed so many people like Jack, so very many, and so I understand the experience of meeting someone who has this story that they desperately want told, this impactful, sometimes traumatic experience that they've been holding on to, sometimes for decades. And I just want to say that I think it's great that you were able to reach out to him, and that he was willing to speak with you as somebody who just watched the result of that today. I thought it was very well done. And I thought it really put his sort of humanity on display, which is the important part of this, right? But I don't want to put the cart before the horse, and we really should let you finish your
Yes.
story.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Because it's twofold. It's like on one side, like Jack really wanted to share his story, but on the other side, he was really precious about who he told it to and how it would be, told, because, he didn't know me. So he didn't know if I had, malicious intent, and I wanted to make him seem, like the local, kook, or
Right.
something, so I think he needed to kind of get a vibe check off of me just to kind of understand that I wasn't, up to anything like that. And I think, being from North Carolina, I think, and having, I had my grandparents at the time were around his same age. I think I knew how to communicate well with him. And there was just kind of this kind of Southern charm that I think we both shared with each other when we we kind of talked to each other. But yeah, that's kind of how we got involved with each other. So then I basically gathered a small group of my really good friends, and we went down to Mount Airy, and we did an interview, which is what you'll see in the documentary. And it was around 2 hours we filmed. And the thing about this interview is I did not know what the answers were going to be. Because like I said on the phone call, he gave me enough information to kind of, get everything firing, to get down there and film it, but not enough like the deep details about, the origins of the gravestone, which is, basically what I wanted to know in the same way everyone listening wants to know. And so I didn't know what I was going to get, as someone who grew up with, an interest in, UFOs and aliens. I had tons of books on aliens growing up and alien action figures, and always was into alien films. I was going into this story with hoping that, it was going to be this grandiose story about, a man befriending, outer space life, like it says on his gravestone. So those were kind of my expectations, but like I said, I didn't know what I was going to get. And then I start the interview. We just kind of get right into it, and I ask him, I'm like, "What's the story, behind your gravestone?" And he, right out the gate, starts talking about how when he was five months old, his sister, stabbed him in the head with a railroad spike hammer. So already I'm like, whoa. This isn't what I was expecting. I remember it was one of the few times in my life where I was completely shocked in a sense, like, and I didn't mean this in a disrespectful way, but I almost wanted to laugh because it was just so unexpected.
That's so wild. Like, how do you react to that? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, of course you want to laugh. Like, you don't know what else to do because it's so strange. It was interesting to me that he said that happened at 5 months old. And immediately, like, my investigator brain goes, well, you were 5 months old. How do you know?
Exactly.
So how did he know that happened to him?
And I've asked him that, and he just says that he has the memory of it. That's really all it boils down to.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's because, because the story involves, basically to follow up that, his sister, according to his story, is his sister stabbed him in the head with a railroad spike hammer when he was 5 months old, and he was basically going to die from this injury. But Outerspace Life, 2 aliens came down from outer space, and they kind of mended his skull through this concoction, and they like went inside his head, and he said his head lit up like a TV screen, and they healed his brain and healed his skull, and and that was the beginning of his communication with Outerspace Life.
There were so many interesting details in that story
Yeah.
when he was telling it too, where he talks about like the doctor comes, because his sister hits him in the head with this railroad spike hammer, and then his parents eventually come home from work. So who knows how long he was there with like half his head caved in or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they decide, well, maybe we should go get the doctor. So, okay, great. That's a good start. And so like the doctor comes, right? And then he's like, well, this kid's for sure going to die. He's going to be dead by the end of like this day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the doctor leaves, and or maybe this is while the doctor was still there. You can maybe like correct me if I get this wrong, but his mom says something like, oh, if my little girl's going to jail, well, then I'm going to jail too. And so she decides that the best course of action, like anybody would in this situation, is to like shove a needle into his exposed brain. And
chicken
then,
bone, actually.
Well, I thought she had to dig the needle out with a chicken bone. Like she shoves the needle in, then she loses that needle. And then she's like, oh shit, how am I going to get this needle out? And then she has to run and get a chicken bone from the kitchen, I guess, to try to dig the needle out. And then, and then she uses that to extract it. And then these motes of light show up that turn out to be fucking aliens or whatever.
Yes.
And then they like fly up his nose and fix his brain by turning his forehead into a TV screen, which I thought was a nice touch. So then everybody outside knows what's going on. But then like on top of that, mixing up like some good old fashioned, like what the fuck did they call it? Like skull powder to heal his skull. I loved that. I loved everything about it, other than like somebody hitting a baby with a hammer, obviously. But the alien part, like that was all great.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine you get your friends and you drive 4 hours and you have cameras set up on tripods, lights, sound equipment. And you think you're going to get a classic, UFO story, or maybe an alien sighting kind of story. And then you get that story, right up front. So it kind of derailed everything in terms of my expectations and which way the interview went. Because at that point, I knew I was dealing with something different.
Well, you can't even prepare,
exactly.
Interview questions because it's, I'll tell you, I've interviewed a lot of witnesses in my day, and so far none of them have a story like that. I do want to touch on something really quick in regards to, how Jack knows this happened at 5 months old. I do have confirmation from a surviving family member that Jack's dad, McKinley, very much vouched for this story.
Yeah. Jack's dad, he had nothing but nice things to say about his dad.
Interesting. Oh.
And his dad, I think, left at a younger age. But all of his stories involving his dad were kind of warm. And he had a few stories where he described, experiences with his dad where these aliens would come and his dad would interact and talk with them. And he even said that, his dad loved those aliens. So that checks out.
Well, what did those aliens look like? Because we keep saying those aliens, but I feel like people really need to know what they look like. They're very distinct.
Yeah, they're very, very distinct. One's a little green man, kind of classic, kind of gray alien style, basically what he described it. And the other is a skeleton man. And I actually have a tattoo on my arm of them.
Do you really?
I do, yeah.
That's
and
dedication.
And their names were Rube and Sidekick. They had longer names. I think one of them was called Zontaniac. And the skeleton, that was Rube. That was his real alien name, was Zontaniac. And then Sidekick, which was a skeleton man. For whatever reason, Jack said he wouldn't give his outer space name. He did not want to give that information out.
Outer space names are private. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Right. It's like he doesn't want to be told on for the outer space taxes that he owes,
Yeah, that's like asking a fairy its true name. It just isn't done.
Yeah. And he mentioned that, I can't remember who right now off the top of my head. I wish I could remember, but he mentioned to me, and you can hear it in the doc, that one of them, I think it was the skeleton man, it liked Earth women.
Oh,
Wow, who doesn't?
He had a thing for Earth women as well.
wow.
So yeah, there was
Did he
all
have
these.
girlfriends.
I that was as far as that went, unfortunately. But yeah, Jack had these stories, and they were full of detail, and they were all unexpected details. Something that I felt like would be, like I said, were unpredictable, and just seemed so original. Where I was like, okay, well, they seem really, really, really out there, but they're also so detailed that it kind of, kept me intrigued with what was being said. They were grounded just enough to keep me engaged and to keep telling the story and asking more questions. My radar, I'll admit it, I'll be straight up honest. My radar instantly was like, oh, this guy's crazy. That was my first thought. When I was doing this interview,
I doubt anybody would blame you for that.
Right.
Yeah. And, a couple of my friends who were there helping me, they were kind of thinking that it was a complete waste of time after that first story had came out, but I pressed on with the story, and I think me pressing forward is when the story really developed, and when I kind of was able to kind of figure out how I wanted to tell Jack's story, because and feel free to ask me whatever you want to ask me, but at the end of the day, I got to really like Jack. He was a really nice man. He was very interested in me and my personal life, and I'll say this, like most elderly people I meet, and maybe it's just the ones I know, but they seem to want to just talk about themselves for some reason. I don't know if that's something that you will agree with or disagree with, but the thing about Jack was he would ask me questions about, my life, and was like genuinely interested in it. Whereas, my experience with elderly people typically is, they're telling me about their medical appointments and, this and that. And it's all involving them or their childhood. But Jack wouldn't really talk about anything like outside, like just talking to him, not interviewing him. None of these stories involving Outerspace Life ever came out. He never would steer the conversation towards, these stories. It was only if you specifically wanted to talk to him about it. And outside of that, he was just really wanting to talk about you and learn about you. But he had a great heart, and I got to become friends with him. And every now and then I would call him and just talk to him on the phone. And every time I called him, I could hear in his voice that he was genuinely like happy to hear my voice and like, glad to hear from me. So, I knew that I had this big responsibility because, Jack wanted his story to be told, but I also knew that I wanted to tell his story in a way that, paid respects to his story, told his story, but also told another part of his story, which involves, traumatic events that happened to him in his childhood. The railroad spike to the hammer is kind of like a more out there version of this, but in terms of his actual childhood, it's in a more simple way to put it is he was mistreated by his mother, and he was mistreated by his sister, and that was kind of a common thread throughout his childhood stories, and was kind of a common thread to when these aliens would come visit him, is usually when he was being mistreated.
Right. Well, like the very first appearance of these aliens is his sister hitting him in the head with a hammer, and then his mom trying to finish the job because if her little girl was going to jail, she was going to go too. Yeah. So I think that sets the audience up pretty well, in terms of like understanding their relationship. Like that's about as fucked up as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, And he shared some details privately a year after the documentary was basically over. Whenever I went to show him the documentary personally, he shared some details that he never had shared with me before, that I'll keep private, but I was very taken aback by those details, and they just were related to his mother mistreating him as a young boy. Things that are basically horrific. What he described to me, and once he told me that, part of the story of this documentary kind of clicked even more. In terms of the documentary, because if you watch the documentary, I present things as Jack said them. You only hear from Jack. I didn't interview anyone else. I'm not a part of it. You don't hear any voiceover. All you hear is Jack telling his story. And what you'll hear is Jack's stories about aliens, Ruben's sidekick, coming down. And then you'll also hear stories about how his mom and sister mistreated him and how he had this traumatic childhood. And I think both of those are what created that gravestone, what's etched on that gravestone. I let the viewer kind of decide what they think the reason is, but I wanted it to be Jack's story, and you hear it from Jack. And I didn't want to tell anyone what to think. I wanted people to watch the documentary and kind of put it together themselves, what they thought about the story.
Sure. No, I think that's a great way to go about it too. There's this moment in the documentary where Jack is talking about his mother's gravestone, and he gets a smile on his face and he chuckles a little bit, recounting how much she would have hated that, how much she would hate that he put like whatever it was about outer space beings on her gravestone.
That blew my mind. He basically, as Ashley set it up in the beginning, there's the two gravestones. So Jack's gravestone says had experiences with Outerspace Life, from 1928 throughout life. But right next to his grave, it was where his mom was buried, and her gravestone said the same thing, but with a different set of years. And like Ashley thought, and probably people think who stumble upon the gravestones, they probably think that, okay, both people in those graves wanted that on their gravestone because it's so specific.
Right.
But to kind of find out that Jack put that on his mother's gravestone, basically out of spite, because he knew she wouldn't want that on there, and she'd be rolling in her grave if she knew what was on her gravestone. I just thought that was a whole nother layer to the story that I couldn't even have wrote, if I was writing this as like a fictional story.
Oh yeah. You can't make this shit up. I mean, and remember this is an important lesson. If you have something specific you want on your gravestone, you need to purchase the gravestone before you die, because if you don't, then it's just whatever person fucking buys it. And if they don't like you, well, tough shit, I guess.
But yeah, you're right. In the documentary, you can see him he says it and he laughs about it.
Yeah.
And it's
Good
like
him.
He pranked his mom,
Right.
and after learning more about his childhood, I kind of get it.
Yeah, no, like I said, more power to him. That is super empowering. Like he got his eventually, so I love that for Jack.
And that's also why I'll just add real quick, because the lore of the gravestone, that's why he had the pre-need gravestone, because his mother passed away. So he had this lot kind of paid for. So when he made her gravestone, he was like, well, I might as well make mine, because Jack wasn't married and he didn't have any children or anything like that. So, and he had some medical issues where, he didn't think he would be living much longer. So when his mom passed away and he had to get her gravestone made, he went ahead and made his, and he just kind of made the messaging all at the same time, which if you look at the gravestones they're identical in kind of style and
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. They look very much like they were purchased at the same time. And of course, the people see that and they're like, people put things on their gravestones, right? They put, father, brother, chef, whatever it is that they want to be known for, and of course, this is what Jack wanted to be known for. And I guess here we are making sure that happens,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So he never wanted it because I don't know. It's just so interesting. It sounds like he tried to tell a story repeatedly and just nobody was interested in it. And that's that's sad, I guess. It's sad that even, because it had to have been local lore at the time, right? For your girlfriend at the time to know that this was something going on, at the local cemetery.
Yeah.
So
And this
people
was
talked
in
about
2013 as well. So this is about 12 years ago, just to kind of set a timeline out there,
Sure. So, word had gotten around. Now, we'll talk about Mount Airy a little bit because I didn't know until you told me that Mount Airy has a claim to fame, right?
It does.
Mount Airy, I guess, is the town that Andy Griffith and the creator of the Andy Griffith Show, they both grew up in Mount Airy, North Carolina. And Mount Airy has now made that their entire identity. It's the town that the Andy Griffith Show is based off of.
Yeah, Mayberry.
Yeah, and they've taken on the moniker of Mayberry throughout the town. It's a big thing. They have a yearly festival. It's much like Point Pleasant with the Mothman. They have a yearly festival. It funds the whole town for basically the whole year. It makes like $5 million a year. Mothman wishes he could do that well,
True.
But it's a tourist town. So, when you were kind of telling me that, and then I was like, I should probably Google this town. Like I probably should have started there. And I start looking into it. I'm like, it makes sense now why the guy at the cemetery and the lady at the museum are like, oh yeah, people ask about him all the time. And, if that's the kind of, if they're getting tourists in and then people are like, hey, go check out these weird gravestones. Like this is bigger than I guess I thought it was. I don't know.
Yeah. And I find it kind of interesting that, because you think about Mayberry and Andy Griffith Show, it's kind of like picture perfect,
Right.
Southern story of, father and son, good relationship, going fishing, kind of wholesome show. And you can think about it, Jack's childhood was kind of based around that similar timeline, a little earlier than that, and had a complete, the much darker version of the Andy Griffith Show. And I just kind of found that to be kind of an interesting kind of location for where all this took place,
Well, and so, it's no wonder, it checks out for Jack being kind of ostracized in the community for his wild stories, right? Especially in a town like that.
Exactly.
People don't want to hear about it. People don't want to talk about it. I'm not completely ready to share every detail that I've gotten so far because, again, this is an open and active investigation still. But some of the things I know from firsthand from family members telling me that they disowned him. They ended up disowning him because of the alien talk. They wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah, he had a falling out with a lot of his family, and every time I would go visit him to either film maybe some extra B-roll for the documentary, he was always by himself. He had 2 cats that he took care of, and he was always by himself, and he didn't really have much visitors, I could tell, and I could tell he was lonely. And he mentions in the documentary how he had a wife, but it was very short-lived. And they basically split after she kind of figured out some of the traumatic things that had happened to him in his early life. And he mentions a lot to me about how, he wasn't a religious person, and which is, in the South, it's the Bible Belt, churches are everywhere. It's kind of the area I grew up in, and which it's an anomaly to be Jack's age in the rural South and to be essentially an atheist is what he was. If anything was his religion, it was Outerspace Life, but people in the town, like preachers and all that, he had a really big disdain for religion because they tried to tell him that these were, demons and ghosts and, but he knew what they were. He said they were Outerspace Life. So that was kind of another, layer to the whole story in terms of, him talking about these stories to people, in his actual life outside of his family. And maybe, if he's telling people these stories and they don't believe him, what else are they not going to believe if he's telling them other stories about, how he's being mistreated at home too, which made me think of that.
Well, and he was a military man, which, at first, just on the surface, those are the details that you get about Jack. Initially, you get you can go to findagrave.com, you can see the headstone. You find the obituary, and it mentions that he was in the military. He was a communications specialist, and that he had traveled all around. I mean, the fact that he came home tells me that he probably didn't have much success, relating to people outside of Mount Airy either, because the world was his oyster. He can go wherever he wanted to, and came back.
Yeah, that's a big part of the thing of the story too, that I felt like gave Jack a lot of authenticity is and kind of credibility, was that he was in the Air Force for 21 years. So he was able to have a career. So in terms of if you were to describe someone as being mentally ill, they're not going to be able to have a 21-year career in the Air Force, So I felt like that gave him a lot of credibility. Also, like I described earlier, he wouldn't talk. He wouldn't talk about anything in any of these stories unless you asked him about it. And he seemed, outside of being interviewed, he was just kind of, just a classic kind of guy, Southern, man. So I felt like those two things kind of were intriguing to me, that he had his career in the military, and outside of when you asked him about these stories, he seemed completely normal.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to the Outerspace Life itself. That's something that you mentioned, is that Jack never refers to them as aliens.
That's true.
And that is a really interesting detail. Let's kind of talk about not just that initial encounter. I mean, obviously I want people to go watch your documentary. The link's in the description. You guys can go see it, the whole thing for itself in Jack's words. But when they appeared to him, they didn't just waltz in the front door.
Nope.
Right? Didn't they appear as like balls of light first that kind of grew and then took their shape?
Yes. And they came from outer space. That's how he describes it, where you could see them actually come down and basically from the sky to ground.
Okay, but like in those preachers' defense, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. If you don't want to be mistaken for a demon or a ghost, maybe don't show up as a human-sized glowing skeleton.
True.
That's fair.
That's a fair point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the only thing that would be Rube, the little green alien, and it's saying his outer space name is Zontaniac and them describing it. But yeah, from a description point of view, yeah, you have a great point.
I'm picturing like basically when I try to think of what these outer space beings, because I'm not going to call them aliens now either. Alien seems rude at this point. So outer space being or outer space life, when I'm trying to picture them, I'm like for the see-through glowing skeleton, because didn't he describe how they could, either one could be see-through, they could grow or shrink sort of at will. And so for that skeleton, I'm sort of picturing like pulp era, like Amazing Stories cover with like a radioactive skeleton or something. And then the Great Gazoo from Flintstones. I mean, that's probably showing my age, but does anybody else know who that is?
I do, yeah.
Like the little green guy? Yeah.
I don't actually. I wish I did.
He's a little green dude. Like, just Google it. You will recognize it. But yeah,
They
that's
had him in the
what I'm
second
picturing.
Flintstones movie. If you're into that type of thing,
That's right.
Okay.
check that piece of shit out. Hey, it's actually not that bad. I like it.
Well,
All right,
it
I'm
had
going
a
on
Baldwin
record.
in it, so and it had a
I
Baldwin in it
hate-
that's not Alec. So
I hate Children of the Corn. I like the second Flintstones live action movie. So that's the kind of person
Okay.
I am.
right, that tells you everything you need to know about her.
No, I think you're right. As a visual, and Tobias, you talk about that all the time. How people akin these things to something in media, right? We see that a lot. I think that's a great description. But all of what he's describing, all of that phenomena in and of itself, is not just unique to Jack's story. Orbs for one. How fucking often do we talk about orbs on this show?
That's true.
In general, of course, them changing shape or taking, or whatever shape they want to. That's very much in ufological lore, right?
Yes.
The skeletons. I've never come across alien skeletons. Maybe Tobias has. He's done this longer than I have. I don't know, but I'm sure it's out there. Again, if they
That's
can
a
take
new
any,
one to me. The weirdest one I've ever received is like completely dark, sort of shadowy beings with pointy ears like elves and red eyes. So glowing skeletons.
I like the one story where the guy goes on the ship and the thing. Oh man, it happened in the 60s. It takes different shape like every time he looks at him, and it's almost like a cartoon bit. Like at one point, it's just a giant head.
It's like so. It's like okay, so like the Cheshire cat just hopped in a flying saucer and decided to come visit this guy. See, this is why contactee stories are always the fucking best, right?
They are, yeah.
Because no two of them are alike somehow.
No.
They're all supposed to represent extraterrestrial life, which I guess, should be pretty varied. I don't know how much of that variety is capable of coming to our planet, seemingly an endless amount based on the fucking stories. But they're always super wild, and the beings are almost always friendly. And that's something I liked about Jack's story too. He seems to have this really sort of deep friendship with these beings. And boy, isn't that refreshing in an era of government cover-ups and alien abduction and everything else that goes on with that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They brought him comfort even when he talked about them. Yeah, you could tell that he was talking about them from like a place of warmth in terms of remembering them, as if he's like remembering like a story about his best friend when he was a young kid. It's kind of how his like disposition was. And if you in the doc, you may remember the point too where he mentioned that they wanted to take him back into outer space with them, Ruben's sidekick, but his parents wouldn't allow him because they said that he was outer space life, and it made his dad mad because they were like, Jack's outer space life, and he needs to come back with us. And his dad got mad because he's like, he's not outer space life, he's my son, but you can say that he's half outer space life.
Yeah, they had like a little compromise. Like they just show up, like they're out going for a walk or something, and these fucking outer space beings show up, and they're just like, like we talked about it, and we decided that Jack is outer space life, and his dad's just like, the fuck you say,
Exactly.
and so they like wander off into a field and kind of talk about it, and then they're like, okay, well, what if we just say that he's like outer space life? Like is that okay? I'm just picturing his dad like rolling his sleeves back down after, he was about to just whoop these outer space beings' asses.
But yeah, that compromise was kind of interesting because it's like, let's play like devil's advocate, and let's say that Jack's fabricating all these stories.
Sure.
Yeah.
Then that story just seems like a strange story to write. You know, that I'm going to tell this story about how me and my dad were walking down a dirt road, and they came and they told me I was Outerspace Life, but my dad didn't like that, and they had made an agreement and say, you know, he's like Outerspace Life. You know, that just is just in
Like,
terms
who
of,
makes that up?
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I say it all the time. My favorite stories, the ones I think are most credible, are the ones that are just so fucking out there. And it's like, no, who the hell came up with that? Like, they're the greatest writer of all time.
Yeah, just like a story that happened also too is the sheet of paper story that's in the documentary. You know, where they wanted to shrink Jack down, so they you know, basically got on a loose leaf paper, and it had to be very specifically a loose leaf paper. It couldn't be any other type of paper, so they could, you know, basically shrink down. You know, there's these descriptions like that where, again, from like a if these are fictional stories, you know, they're very creative.
I love that one specifically because it's another Jack's dad episode of this where like okay, so they like set Jack up on this piece of paper and they shrink him down and then they like bring him back to full size, and then the dad's like, "Hey, you fucks, I want that paper," and they're just like, "Well, you can't have it. We're taking it with us. This is ours." I'm just like, what is happening here? Like, what even is this argument? Why do they even need the paper? Why does Jack's dad want it? I'm so enthralled by what is happening. To be a fly on that wall, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I'll add too is that these stories, you know, his gravestone says throughout life, but these stories basically ended, you know, in his preteen years. And because I asked him about that, and he said that they told him that if he ever needed them, he could reach out to them, and if they could, they would show up. And I asked him and I kind of made him do it while I was there with him. I said, "Could you try to contact him now?" And we just kind of sat there, and he said he was trying to contact them, and we were just quiet. And he said they weren't responding, and they haven't responded in, you know, in a very long time.
Yeah.
So it says throughout life, but it's really is more of his childhood into his teenage years is when these stories kind of took place.
Did he give you an idea of when the last time he would have had contact with them was?
You know, and I'm kind of frustrated by this because it's been over a decade since I've edited this documentary, and not everything made the documentary. I actually intend to go back through, and there's some stories that Jack told me that I have recorded, but were cut for time, that I want to explore again. But there's probably so many details of this story that I'm just not fresh on right now.
That's
Sure.
okay.
It's
Yeah.
totally
Just
fair.
because it's been over a decade since, you know, so you might even know the documentary better than me right now.
I literally just watched
Yeah.
it. That's why I'm able to go through all of those stories.
But yeah, I want to go back through because there's a lot of other stories he described to me. And, you know, maybe they could help you, Ashley, in terms of your ongoing investigation. Maybe some of those stories can help with that. So I'm gonna go through those. For one, it's just fun to kind of go back through and kind of remember. You know, it's been, you know, I'm glad you contacted me about this because I made this documentary, and it played at one film festival. It played in Charlotte at the Charlotte Film Festival, and then I knew Jack wanted it online. And I had it on a website called Vimeo for a while. And it used to have its own website. It used to have a website called Outerspace Life. documentary.com, where you could watch it. But then, to be honest, I got cheap and I didn't want to pay for the domain and the Squarespace website. So I took it down.
I get it. They're not free.
Yeah. So after like 5 years of having it up, I kind of took it down. And then it was kind of like out of commission, like you couldn't find it. And, but now I put it up on YouTube, because now, Ashley, you contacting me got me excited to put it on YouTube, because I was like, oh, people are interested in learning about Jack's story. I need it. I owe it to Jack to put his story, back online, because that's something I promised him. And I'm just excited that, the documentary is back, is online. It's accessible. And I'm excited to kind of dive back into some of the other stories that I haven't heard in a while. I'm going to go through some of the old footage and see if anything else is there. But
I would love to see it.
Cool. Yeah. I think it's a really, there's a lot of aspects about this, and if there is anything that could help, I mean, even like corroborating the fact that, like, the family members that I spoke to that confirmed that McKinley believed in these stories, they didn't, those family members claimed to not believe in these stories, right? It was just all bullshit. It was all crazy. Yeah. And, that's fine. But like the fact that they say, well, he believed in it too, and then you have, of course, he vouches for the stories. And then you have Jack saying, my dad was there. It's kind of the closest we can get to that history, because McKinley's long, long, long dead. We're definitely not, and Jack's not here anymore, So, it's kind of the closest we can get to try to piece together this history. The most fascinating fact to me, and the thing that I really need you guys to keep in mind when hearing this, at the end of the day, you can make up your own opinions about what you think Jack's story was, right? Whether it was real, whether it was mental illness, whether it was all a lie, it doesn't matter. This started happening in 1928. This predates modern ufology.
It does. Yeah.
It really does. Roswell didn't happen until 1947, right? I mean,
yeah.
That was Roswell and Kenneth Arnold sighting. Like that was really the kickoff of modern American UFO culture. Yeah, that it wasn't a thing until that. So
even if these were like stories like the initial encounter, right? Even if that he didn't really remember it, it's just that's the story he was always told from his dad. And this is all happening, from then up through his preteens. That still predates modern ufology. And the fact that he doesn't call them aliens, right? The fact that he doesn't describe a UFO, with them, and they're just kind of coming with their bodies. I mean, to me, it's as genuine as you get. There's no influence of the media with these stories, in my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
I was just going to say it. Yeah, his what's interesting about these stories is that they don't include the cultural influence that you would expect or that you often see in many stories today. So even if a witness isn't intentionally trying to embellish a story or change details, just the way that they'll interpret it is so heavily influenced by culture that you have to kind of tease the truth out of them. You just got to know how to ask the right questions and get them to be real specific about details and not just their interpretation of things. Because again, that's going to be very heavily colored by all of these like cultural influences. And you don't see that in Jack's story. And what's so interesting about it then is that removed from those cultural influences, it has, like Ashley has mentioned, so much in common with so many other high strangeness cases. It's like it's high strangeness before high strangeness, right? With the alien showing up as motes of light, or we would interpret that as orbs now, but whatever, 6 of one, half dozen of another, right? And then their outlandish appearances. I mean, just everything about it, the personal relationship, how it affected his life, how it changed his life, really. Just all of that, to me, lends itself to a credible experience. And I don't mean that to say that I know that objectively outer space beings came down and he had a relationship with them, but there is an authenticity to this experience. Certainly something has happened to Jack, and that is very, very clear, which is just fascinating.
Yeah, very well said. I'll say this. I know I can say confidently that Jack really, when he told me these stories, he, wholeheartedly believed them. So it wasn't for attention or anything. It seemed like he really had these stories that he wanted to tell that happened to him, and he wanted his story to be told, and he really believed his story. And I like to, give myself some credit. I have pretty strong, bullshit meter. And while a lot of red flags went off when Jack was telling me stories, just because some of them just seemed kind of, like, his mom digging in his head with a chicken bone, is going to naturally make a red flag go off. I never felt like Jack was bullshitting me. It always felt like it was true to him. So I just wanted to add that in there because I think that's important, that he never once gave off the vibe that he was lying and knew he was lying.
Yeah.
Right.
And we can't, we can't definitively prove one way or the other. The unfortunate part is that Jack did pass away in 2015. He's not here to tell his story anymore. But we can only go based off of, again, trying to build some type of timeline, trying to talk to other people that might have known him, right? Or had experiences or contacts with them. Like I said, it seems Lance, I'm sorry that he bestowed it onto you, but maybe you're grateful for that. It sounds like you are, which is heavy.
Yeah,
I know.
It is heavy because I finished the documentary the year he passed. And I was lucky enough, I was able to show it to him. So he's seen the documentary. He signed off on it. He greenlit it, essentially told me that it was okay. Everything is okay for me to use. Cause when I was piecing together the story, I'd say it's kind of split 50-50. It's stories involving outer space life, and then also stories around, his childhood trauma with his family, his sister and mother. So I was, when I was showing him, I was kind of nervous that he would think that I talked too much about, his family, but he had no notes on it, and he thought it was great, and he approved of it. So I did feel great about that because I knew, like you said, it was heavy. It was kind of a heavy responsibility. And for the longest time, I took like a year off from even editing it after I shot it because I was like, what do I do with this? Yeah. So I'm very happy that I was able to finish it and show it to him, before he passed. Yeah, I mean, and another thing I'll add too is, the documentary was filmed in two different time periods. You'll see a more younger, or I guess healthier version of Jack in the interview. And then you'll see Jack, the year before he passed, basically, where he looks a little more thin and frail.
I was wondering why he was so beat up. I was like, damn, did Lance do a number on him? Like, what happened?
Yeah, it was right before, I had booked it a weekend to come down to finish and shoot some more B-roll. And I got my friend on board, and he had very limited availability. And that same weekend we were going down there, basically Jack called me and said he had fell.
Gotcha.
So he had fell. So he had like bruised his face. His face was really bruised, but we just went with it. And Jack took us to lunch at a steakhouse and local steakhouse, and it was a good time.
Yeah, he was all fucked up. I was like, what they do to this guy? So there's your there's your alibi, right? You didn't do it. It just
No.
to get more story out of him.
But yeah, I
That's
know-
honestly like my parents are getting older now,
Yeah.
and just they're always fucking hurt. Like you just
Yeah.
show up, and you'll just be like, "What happened? Were you just fucking
Mhm.
mugged? Did somebody roll you in the driveway? Like, oh no,
Yeah.
you just fell down
Yeah.
the stairs or something? Yeah, all right. Well, shit, you look like fucking
And he
10
had had
miles of
multiple
bad road.
strokes in his lifetime too.
He what?
Oh wow.
He had had multiple strokes in his lifetime
Oh
as well.
boy.
At that point, yeah. Wow.
So I think that was kind of what made him get the gravestone, because he was dealing with a lot of health complications, and but he lived longer. He told me he's living longer than he thought he would.
He lived a long time. I mean, he had a good run.
May we all live longer than we thought we would.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. And I remember learning that he passed and being not surprised because obviously his age, but
Right.
feeling kind of like it was left a little open ended. I basically, like I described earlier, I would call him every now and then, and just to kind of talk to him. And one time I called and it just did that beep beep beep, like the number's not connected anymore, kind of sound effect, and then I was like, something's off, and then looked him up, Googled his name, obituary, and then there it was. And that's kind of how I learned how he passed. I regret that, but I felt like we had a natural friendship, but yeah, I'm just it kind of added to it because around that time was when I was trying to get it to play at film festivals, and I remember it affected me, but I feel great about it now because I was able to capture his story, and I was the only one to ever do it, and it's kind of wild to me because he really, really wanted to tell his story, and I felt like I got in right at the buzzer, not to make a joke out of it, but it does feel like that. It's like
Sure.
I was able to just happen to stumble upon his gravestone through word of mouth and contact him and get this thing created. And here we are 10 years later talking about it.
Right. No, I mean, you clearly did your best to honor Jack in this. And that is apparent, not just in this interview, it's apparent in the documentary to me. So, you know what? You can make jokes. Like, it's fine. You fucking earned it. Like, you can make some jokes. Nobody's going to judge you.
No, yeah. The whole thing, it's kind of mixed feelings because I probably come across in this conversation like real serious, and I'm not. But I actually pretty goofy. But this topic is so, I guess, close to me that it's like one, I'm just glad to be talking about it, and two, I don't want it to make it about me. I want it to be about Jack, because that's always. Yeah. That's always what it's been about. And that's how the documentary is presented. And I wish Jack could have been the one here. I wish you could have talked to him. He's way more interesting than I am. And he would have gave you way more details. And, but unfortunately I'm the one who has to share the news.
Sure.
Well, and but you have a story too. And that's kind of where, I mean, you and I can bond over that, because that's very much where I'm at and why I'm writing a book about Indrid Cold and all the dead people that, used to talk to him all the time. Right.
Yeah.
Tanya was my friend, she wasn't just a contactee. I mean, that's how it started, but you learn a lot by cultivating these friendships as an investigator. And I don't advise other aspiring investigators to go out and make friends with all your contactees. It can be exhausting. But it's really special when you do, because they don't just give you what everybody else knows. Like you get the other side to it.
Yeah.
Which is missed a lot of the time in just being interested in just their one, little story. There's so much more. It's an onion.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, and it does create a sense of pressure that you can add to it yourself. Um, that's self-induced because Jack never once was like, you better make this good. You better tell my story. It was never nothing like that. It was always he was just kind of grateful that we were interested and had cameras, capturing it. But you kind of create this self-induced pressure to, like, especially when, he passes away, and it's kind of like, well, I have to finish this documentary. It's like, it just, like, the stakes get higher.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, you coming on the show, it's getting to the right people, right? It's getting to people that are interested in this, people that are already into these topics, who want to learn more. And, anybody listening here today, you've never heard this story before. I promise you. It's just not possible that you have, unless you knew Jack yourself and he told you himself. And they're the right folks that are definitely going to take this and carry it forward, which again is exactly what Jack wanted. He just wanted people to hear his story.
Yeah, that's a great point, because for a while, I spent so much time on this documentary, and I was kind of disappointed with its reception in film festivals. I submitted it to over 10 film festivals, and it only got into one. But at the same time, I was incredibly proud of the documentary because it was such a big undertaking, mentally. And I was also proud of, what came along with the documentary, getting to know Jack and becoming friends with him and getting to share his story and experience, a bit of Jack's life. And I never put it together because I was always kind of a little bit disappointed with, the lack of film festivals taking it on. But I think you're 100% right that was the wrong audience. And it makes me excited that now it's on YouTube, because I feel like now the right people can find it that are actually interested in the story. And I actually think the documentary is pretty pragmatic and just kind of telling it. So if you want to know the story, the documentary's there, and it's I'm just kind of happy that it's kind of getting this second life, and I think the audience that you're describing will appreciate it more. Yeah. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of work, and especially because this, you've made other films, right?
Yes.
What's different about this one compared to those?
Well, this is the only documentary I've made outside of, like, film school projects. Everything else has been narrative based, which is unfortunate, because I love documentary. I love real stories from real people, because sometimes I think, reality is, not to sound cliche, but reality is stranger than fiction, which we've all heard. You hear some stories from Jack and you're like, well, I couldn't have thought of that. But yeah, it's just documentary, and all my other projects are narrative. Now I work as a video editor. I'm more in the commercial, social media world, digital world. So that's why this is also fun to kind of talk about, because this is kind of like it's like from a different chapter in my career. But I would love to do more things like this. I would love to dive into a new subject like I did with Jack. The only thing that comes with that, I kind of felt like, and maybe you relate to this, Ashley, it's going to be hard to top meeting a Jack. I'll never meet another Jack Overby. So I'm kind of like, now when it comes to making a documentary, I'm kind of like spoiled in the terms of, like, a subject matter. I'm like, everything kind of seems boring.
Sure.
And I guess I'm just waiting for that special story that makes me want to cover it in the same way I wanted to cover this one.
Yeah. I mean, have you met our producer, Nate? That's probably about the only thing that I could think could top that personality. He's interesting. He did go to Skinwalker Ranch recently. Well, kind of recently. So,
I want to go there.
Yeah. and fought skinwalkers or something. I don't know. Dino beavers. I don't know what Nate does in his free time. Anyway.
It's mostly wrestle dino beavers. That's my understanding. Now, I mean, I have, I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people at this point. This isn't meant to take away from anybody's experience of course, but, my personal journey has been one that's kind of shown me the world is full of Jacks, honestly.
Yeah.
And they have these incredible stories, and that makes me thankful that there are people like you, Lance, who can make documentaries to help share them, because I promise if you stick around and you keep looking, there are so many people like this with these kinds of incredible experiences throughout their lives, and they are desperately looking for someone to take them seriously. And sometimes they find Ashley, or sometimes they find me, or hopefully some of them will find you too. But they definitely exist.
When you said there's a lot of Jacks out there, I loved hearing that. I love the idea of that, and I believe you. I think that's a good way to put it. I think everybody deserves a chance to tell their story. And outside of reaching out to people like me to make it, I would also tell people, encourage people in general to, this is the era, Jack, he didn't grow up in our timeline with, the internet. And, now we have smartphones, feel empowered too. If you have a story that you want to tell, don't wait for someone to tell it for you. I would recommend, if no one wants to tell your story, just tell it yourself. That's kind of the beauty of this. And, but it also adds an interesting dynamic to me telling Jack's story, because he didn't have the, technological understanding to tell his story. And I was just kind of there to kind of do that. Yeah, I love the idea that there's a lot of Jacks out there, and I'm open to learning more stories. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to.
Well, how do people do that?
You can email me the same way Ashley did. I have proof that I respond, because I got back to Ashley pretty quickly. But yeah, my email is Lance Kestrel. So it's LanceKestrel @gmail.com. And my social media handle, like Instagram and all that, is, at Lance Kestrel, similar to my email address. So it's at LanceKestrel. And then, like Ashley mentioned earlier, I'll have a link. Not I'll have a link, but there will be a link to the documentary in the episode description, where you can check out and hear and see, Jack tell these events, himself. And if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, that would probably be smart, because I'm going to go back through old footage and maybe upload some stuff that didn't make the documentary, and maybe revisit some things and make some more kind of content, just because I feel like a new energy around this project. And but also I'm stoked that Ashley's investigating the story further, and she has mentioned some things to me that are exciting that I didn't know about in relation to this story. So I'm incredibly excited to see, where Ashley takes this. So definitely reach out to her and keep her updated, probably more so than me at this point.
Well, you're the first person, if I get anything new so far, you've been the first person I tell, because I don't know. Because I get it. It's not your story. It's Jack's story. But like you're the torch holder now. Like so, I feel
yeah,
obligated. You know.
I'm sure you'll stay in touch. Yeah.
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 And Lance, let me say this: such a freaking wholesome guy. He's he talks to me and he's like, well, it's not really the documentary is not really out anywhere because it's not really like good. And I'm like expecting this like piece of shit, just obvious YouTube quality documentary, and I watch it and like it's not that. So
I've been in worse documentaries. I've been in a decent number so far in my paranormal career, and I have absolutely been in worse. It was good.
Yeah. I can be pretty critical of myself. I think it was just the first thing I did right out of college. And it was just kind of low budget. And I sometimes I kick myself because I'm more experienced now as a filmmaker, in terms of the technical side of things and video editing and just storytelling. And if I could do this documentary over today, I feel like it would have been like the thing that changed my career. But since I was, but you can't time things perfectly sometimes. And this documentary is kind of an example of that. I was basically giving this incredible subject of Jack's life, right out of college with no money and, friends with just the cameras they owned. And, I'll be nice to myself and I'll say, I think for resources I had, I'm very proud of what I did. It's just that I wish I could have gave it that, like a more polished treatment, like I would do, today with more modern equipment and things like that.
Oh, I get it. I just submitted my fourth book to a publisher, and I don't go back and read my books because I can't, because I'll drive myself fucking crazy. You can't, if you are an artist or any kind of creative person, it's difficult. We are always our own worst critics. And I absolutely do understand that. I'm just happy you're giving yourself some grace here, because the finished product, from my perspective, especially now that you've described what you were working with, I thought it turned out pretty good.
Yeah. And when I got off the phone with Ashley, when she reached out, I watched it again, probably for the first time in 8 years. And I was like smiling the whole time watching it, because I was like, oh, I was enjoying myself watching it. And I was like, this documentary is not bad at all. And I realized you were right, actually, that I was probably giving it.
I was expecting something that was like you couldn't understand what he was saying.
Right. Like shot on like an iPhone 5 or something.
Right. It wasn't that at all.
But I was like, I was excited because I was like, to your point you just made, the video's clear, the audio's clear, the story is told. What more could I want, in terms of, just, presenting Jack's story and, having a space for it on YouTube where people can just, type it in. You can just type in Outerspace Life in YouTube and it'll, or Outerspace Life Jack Overby, and you can watch it. And that's really all I wanted anyways.
Well, so. And, I'll be honest, as somebody who watches a lot of documentaries that are about UFOs and contactees and cryptids and ghosts, and, I enjoy the fact that it's simple. It's just Jack. It's just Jack and a story. Like, we don't get that a lot. We get a lot of, as the queen of banter with a podcast that has a lot of unnecessary banter. I love that.
That's all we do.
That's all we do. I love that it just cuts to the chase. It just gets right into it. You this is what you signed up for. This is what you're getting. So, I mean, God, if you went on to do, to do more of these, I mean, we're more than happy to, have you come back and do a revisit of, hey, I decided to, pick this up again. I found another Jack, or I found more Jacks, and here's what I'm doing. I think that'd be awesome. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, 1,000%. I definitely would love to get back into the documentary world and, do something like even remotely close to this again would be so exciting, and then the documentary, just to kind of promote it a little bit more, like you'll get a strong taste of Jack's just day-to-day life, because it's basically, outside of some scenes at the graveyard where, I do have some shots of Jack visiting his own gravestone, but you just kind of see him in his house, in his element. You kind of get insight into his world, in his home, a couple of years before he passed away. And I think, it's just kind of neat. I think if you just want to kind of get a little bit of insight into who he was, I feel like you truly will get a snapshot of that time, the years right before he passed.
When he puts on the record, did he pick that song?
He did, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that was genuine or how movie magic goes.
That's a good point. He did put that on. I did put fresher audio on, like
Right.
I added the music track over it in editing just to kind of make it more crisp audio. But that is the actual song he put on.
That's cool.
Which I thought was fitting. And that song is cool. I listen to it every now and then.
Well, I'd love to keep you forever, but I'm also not going to keep you forever. And I know people, they definitely want to get on that. If they haven't yet, go watch the damn documentary. What are you doing here still? But for anybody else, especially for the residents of Mount Airy, because, I promised them when I knew and when I felt, comfortable releasing this, I would. Is there anything you want to say to them?
I would just say, in terms of Mount Airy people, I would just say, give Jack the benefit of the doubt, and keep an open mind. He had a traumatic upbringing, and you could either come up with the idea that those traumatic events made him create these fictional stories to kind of, make sense of his world, because it was a darker world than he wanted or deserved as a child, or these Outerspace Life really visited him because he had a darker childhood, and maybe somehow that involved them coming down to visit him, and no one knows. That's the thing. You just listen to the story, decide for yourself. It's either or. I have my own theory. You'll watch it. You may have your own theory. But at the end of the day, just kind of listen to Jack and form your own opinion of it. But I like the idea. I like knowing that Jack got to tell his story, and I feel like he truly is, gets to rest in peace because of that. And I got to help him with that. And if you don't believe him, that's okay too. But I'm just more happy that, you're able to at least hear it, to form that opinion. But yeah, just go into it with an open mind, and be easy on him, because he was a sweet guy.
I think that's great. Tobias, do you have, Tobias is our Jerry Springer with his final thoughts usually. So
I am not about to even try to one up Lance's excellent final thoughts and message to the people of Mount Airy, and I think that is as good a place as any to call it here. And anybody who wants my wisdom, they can get that shit any old fucking time. Let's we're just gonna let Lance talk here, and I think he did a great job.
no,
Thanks for having me on. This was really fun. I am interested in this type of topic, so to be on a podcast talking about it and also talking about this project is the most fun I had in a long time. So thanks for having me on.
No, that's awesome. And again, I'm sure, if we can find any reason to have you back, we will. You've been a great guest. So thank you.
Maybe a follow-up if we get some emails or some story responses, maybe we can follow up. But yeah, I like I said earlier, I'm excited to learn more about what you told me, Ashley, because you have some really cool things in the works in terms of one story you told me over email that in relation to this. I'm not going to say it.
I know what you're talking about though. Yeah.
But the story continues, and that's also exciting for me. I was like, oh, the story's not completely told. There's still more to be told about this, and that pumps me up.
Yeah, it's definitely still a very ongoing and active investigation. I know a lot of you people are here from the Mount Airy Facebook groups, and thank you so much for listening and hanging on with us. If you want to go listen to our other episodes, great. They're not quite like this. They're a lot more childish, but we do good research, right? We're good at our jobs, but
we're allowed to have fun. So it's good,
Yes.
solid investigation with like
With a side of fun.
1,000% more Bigfoot dicks than
Yeah.
you're probably used to.
Yeah, which most people are probably used to 0. So
It's so many more than 0.
but stick around with us if you would like, right? If I have updates that I can share, I will as I go. But ultimately, this is now, I can't do much more. I need you guys to speak up, and especially for the family members. I've talked to a lot of people about you guys, which sounds weird and stalkerish, but people say nice things. Everything is anonymous if you want it to be. I know I have a podcast. I know you Google me, the first thing that comes up is IMDb. I get it. But I respect the actual investigative work more than I do being famous. If I wanted to be famous, I could have done it in much different ways, right? I want to get to the bottom of this story. And if you have stories that you want to share with me about Jack or anything related to this, or, anything at all, everybody knows that. But, this specifically, I can grant you complete anonymity if that's what you prefer. But I know that this is a lot. I know it's probably a lot for you guys to hear, especially the family members that claim to have no knowledge of this. I bet you didn't know this about Uncle Jack, I guess. Here you go. But anyway, I will put a better description of how you can reach me if you're not seeing it in the Facebook group directly. If you are seeing it in the Facebook group, just send me a message and we can talk. Of course, I'll put all of Lance's information down. If you would prefer to contact him, maybe you think he's nicer than me. I don't know. He probably is. And that's who you want to talk to. And of course, you can always talk to Tobias. He's more than happy to talk to you. He's nice. I promise. He doesn't bite unless you ask him to. So there's that. With that being said, guys, see you back here next Wednesday.